So he was at one point leading the team tasked with finding him.
Yeah, he was asked to make a list of individuals within the government that could potentially be gray suit, and he did. He sat down and he made, as an analyst, he made a very detailed list and sent these FBI agents all over the country and world in these wild goose chases that pointed anywhere but him.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to Deviant Off Script, our second show, our Friday show. It's the one that's a little more relaxed, a little more loose, a little more just conversations with people that we find interesting, right? For a million different reasons. You heard last week we had our first conversation with Mike Hammond, a detective, retired detective from the Chicago Police Department, who was really, really interesting. And I think what you'll find in this next conversation that we're doing is it's going to be with a guy named Eric O'Neill. And if you've seen the movie Breach, or if you are familiar with the story of Robert Hanssen, who was one of the most prolific spies in American history, he worked at the FBI for years, and for a long time was selling secrets to the Russian government. And so we sat down with Eric O'Neill, who was one of the men tasked with bringing down Robert Hanssen from inside the FBI. We think you'll really, really like it. It's kind of a step outside of the normal crime that I think everybody's used to around these parts. It's a little bit more about espionage, about the government. It's kind of an interesting look at how things operate inside the FBI, how the spies catch the spies, essentially. I'm flying solo this week because it's basically Dan is on vacation and taking a step away for the week. So it's just me. It's just Eric O'Neill from the FBI. Here's our conversation. We think you're really going to like it. Eric, thanks so much for joining us today. And I was reading your story, which is fascinating for a number of reasons, which we'll get into. But I'd love to start with, how does someone like you, or how does somebody at all, get into the FBI and counterintelligence, espionage, being a spy? We all see it in the movies. We all see it in the shows.
Right.
What's the story of how Eric O'Neill got to that point?
Well, Andrew, that's a great question. I should first say thanks for having me here on Deviant. Looking forward to our discussion. I get that question a lot. How did you get into the FBI? And in fact, I speak to so many young people who want to go join the FBI, and the sometimes labyrinth and confusing ways of getting in. Now, number one, it's hard to get in the FBI, but back when I applied, there was a surge in recruiting under, back then it was Bill Clinton's counterterrorism bill. So I actually joined the FBI as an undercover operative to go hunt terrorists, but more than 50% of what I did was hunt spies. I applied to the FBI, the DEA, the CIA, the Secret Service, pretty much all of the cool agencies in the US government, right? Because I was working as a consultant, I wasn't happy. I mean, I was, in my early 20s at that point. I think I was 22, and I wasn't ready to just sit in an office and stare at an Excel spreadsheet. So I was looking for something that would give me skills I couldn't find anywhere else, sort of repair this. I was raised to go into the Navy, to go into the armed services, and I didn't. And I always felt bad about that. So I wanted to serve in some capacity, serve my country. And I just wanted a change in my life. I heard back from the FBI, the DEA, and the Secret Service very quickly. And the FBI was the first to give me a spot at the academy in Quantico to train. Now, if you read my book, Great Day, or you watch the movie Breach, you'll see that I wasn't a special agent. And this confuses people all the time.
Right.
I was something different. I was the actual title is investigative specialist. The nom de plural is ghost. And the reason that we were called ghosts is because we were specially trained to investigate and follow high priority targets without them knowing we were there.
Right.
And the idea being that, special agents spend so much time learning the different legal requirements and so much that they have to learn. They're not very good at following people.
Yeah.
So the FBI developed a team of ghosts that is specialized in these very detailed counterintelligence and counterterrorism investigations, and primarily how you can follow someone without ever being seen. So I was at once a spy and a spy hunter. I had to learn all the tradecraft for all the foreign intelligence services so that I could follow them without them. And they're the experts, right, in detecting surveillance, ever knowing I was there.
So, I mean, you don't necessarily go to college and major in being a spy, right?
That's right.
So I can talk to me a little. You go to college, you decide relatively early that you want to get into, kind of this government work. Like, what did you major in? Like, how did you start? How does that all work?
Well, I went to Auburn University, and
War Eagle,
War Damn Eagle. That's right. And I went to Auburn to study aerospace engineering. I was only supposed to go to Auburn for a year, and then I was going to restart as a first year as a plebe at the Naval Academy, and that's why I was in aerospace. After a year, I'd met a girl. I didn't really find that I loved aerospace, and I decided I didn't want to leave Auburn, and I ended up completely disappointing my parents and staying at Auburn. And I bounced around a little bit. I was in pre-med, I was in architecture. I ended up with a dual degree in psychology and political science with a minor in criminology. And what do you do with that?
So this all tracks, right? I was going to say, this kind of all tracks.
Right. It's like all nuts. Yeah. So anyway, my idea when I was at Auburn was that I was going to practice law, ended up going to law school later in my career. But that psychology and political science was going to be super useful in practicing law. All things being equal, it would have been better if I stayed in engineering. I could have taken the patent bar and done a completely different area of law. But that's what I did. And, we make our choices and we have to live by them. And that's one of the big reasons that I decided that I need to find a new way to accelerate my career and that service that I wanted to do to my country. And that's how I got in the FBI. It ended up, though, Andrew, it ended up, ironically, that psychology degree served me really well as an undercover operative, particularly when I went undercover to catch Robert Hanssen, and I had to do this face-to-face undercover investigation.
So we'll get to Hanssen. The thing that's fascinating to me is, like, you're talking about you're a ghost, right? That you are doing things inside the FBI that you have to basically be invisible.
Right.
Inside the walls of the FBI, is this a scenario where, like, your job and what you do is actually not known to people that work at the FBI? Are you a ghost inside the bureau?
That's absolutely correct. I had a code name. I wasn't even really known broadly by my name. I mean, people could find my name, but we referred to each other with code names. We were kept separate from the rank and file in the FBI. We had off sites and black sites and our own units and our own chain of command. And the reason is because investigative specialists would end up having to investigate FBI agents when they went rogue. We'd investigate all sorts of Americans who might be trusted insiders or spies or moles to find out whether the intelligence we were receiving from overseas was true, whether this person was trying to drop secrets to a foreign power. And that was our mandate. Because it wasn't just following terrorists around to stop them from blowing something up, or foreign intelligence officers to see who they might meet or what they might do. It was also to track traitors.
Right. My co-host Dan and I, we watch a lot of police shows. And I am a huge fan of the show NYPD Blue. And one of the recurring characters in that show is a guy that works for the NYPD's Internal Affairs Bureau.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of the narrative is that the rank and file loathes the IAB because they're always coming after them. And it's, from your perspective, you were essentially doing that at the federal level.
In a certain way. We were a little different in that in that my specialty is counterintelligence.
Okay.
I am highly trained in countering the espionage practices of a foreign adversary. That was my mandate, to
Okay.
go hunt spies.
Got it.
Now, that spy might be a FBI agent or a
Right.
CIA case officer
Right.
or someone working in the NSA who has turned traitor and gone rogue.
Yeah.
In that case, there would be a team of special agents who would be running the case and giving me my mandate, saying, we think he's going to go here. We want you to watch him for the next 3 weeks. We want to see what he does, and my team would do that.
Yeah.
So we weren't treated that way. We were very much treated like an asset. If the rank and if the executives and the top tier agents were smart, they used us as a very targeted asset to determine investigative
Right.
facts that they couldn't find.
Having grown up in Virginia, knowing a lot of people in Northern Virginia, like everybody kind of works for the government, right? It's just a thing that everybody understands.
Yeah, there's a lot of spies in Northern Virginia too.
Yeah. Well, and so one of the things that's fascinating to me is like, it is not unheard of to have a neighbor who, they go, oh, that's my neighbor, Eric. He works for the government, but nobody knows what he does.
Right. Yeah.
So my question to you is like, did your neighbors, like, how do you frame when you have a job that is incredibly secretive?
Right.
How do you frame that?
Yeah, it was difficult. I wasn't allowed to tell people what I did. And now I lived, at the time I joined the FBI, I lived in a group house in Adams Morgan in Washington, D.C. with 3 other roommates. And I worked weird hours. I had this special car that no one was ever allowed to take a ride in. I'd go, I'd come out of the house with 2 big duffel bags of gear, and and they were wondering what the heck. Now, at some point, someone sees your credentials, or
Right.
they realized I worked for the FBI, but I can never tell them what I did for the FBI. And if someone asked, I would tell them I worked for the Department of Justice, or I worked for the government. One of the things I would say is I work for the government as a geopolitical analyst. And that was a great line, because that immediately shut down the conversation. No one had any interest in learning anything else I did.
Their eyes
no one ever
over.
said, well, what's that? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I realized that was a lousy way to ever attract the interest of anyone that I wanted to date. So I did what I was told to do. I'd lie. I'm an archaeologist. I'm thinking of going to med school, or I had all sorts of weird things that I would say I did. I just couldn't say I worked for the FBI.
Did you have to? You got married. You had a wife. Did you have to keep? You had to keep that from her.
I did. She did not know precisely what I did. She knew that I worked for the Bureau. I couldn't tell her what I was doing. I couldn't tell her any specifics about any cases. I would get up, I would go to work, I would come back, and we wouldn't talk about work. And, at one point she was interviewed, I think after the movie Breach, and she said that it was actually refreshing to have a husband who didn't talk about work all the time. We talked about other things.
It's interesting because, yeah, I imagine like that just completely is removed from the entire dynamic.
Yeah, it is, because that part of your life has to be completely controlled and compartmentalized.
Yeah.
And that can cause a lot of problems in a relationship when you can't explain why you're gone for 2 days. And, I couldn't tell her, like, my target decided to get in his car and drive south. And the next thing I knew, I was in Miami. That happens.
So, it's not even close to the same, but I spent 20 years in the news business, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I understand the concept of, there's no 9 to 5. You work when the work needs to be done.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. You move when the target moves. You eat when they eat. You sleep when they sleep. Absolutely.
So you were on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah, there were no days off. There were no holidays. There was none of that. If you could make plans, vacation plans, but then your target moved and there was a priority case, and your vacation had to be, you hope you get your plane tickets back because you weren't going. Right.
Yeah, I mean, like, this sounds so granular, but I'm like, do you put in for PTO? Hey, I need next week off.
Yes, you put in, and you work on a team and a squad, and your team needs you. And if you're going to be gone, you got to find someone from another team to come join your team and help, right? Or you're a man down. When you're in special operations, everyone relies on each other. So it was complicated to be gone, and it was hard to be gone too, because you work these cases and you want to see them to their conclusion. You don't want to you don't want to disappear when the cool stuff happens.
Yeah.
So it was very difficult to be married. I think that in what I did in the ghosts in the FBI, had the highest rate of divorce. Even ghosts who married each other would end up not sticking with each other, and I could see that happening. Even while I was working undercover, and working undercover, by the way, is brutal. It is. You always have to be on top of your game. You can never slip. You can't make a mistake.
Yeah.
A mistake can either blow a $1 billion case, or it could be fatal, or it could get one of your colleagues hurt. So you have to be on. You have to be perfect every time, and that can be mentally exhausting.
Yeah.
Weird hours, overnights, and travel. So what I was doing was also going to make everything harder on myself. I was going to law school at night while I was working for the FBI, doing all this to try to improve my career, with this idea that I was going to come back as either a Department of Justice attorney, and a prosecutor, or decide to go back to special agents class, go back through Quantico. Which would have been weird, because I would actually have come back as a special agent and had to deal with, at that point in my career, I was making more than a brand new special agent. So they'd have to figure that out. And a big reason for that was I was married, and I was trying to find a way to get out of doing this kind of work, this very intense undercover work, and into something that would be a bit more stable.
You mentioned the undercover, and I think we all, the general public, as I've said before, like a lot of what we know comes through movies and television and all this stuff. But and it is incredibly intense work, and I see what you mean by there's no choice but to be perfect, because if you're not perfect, it can kill people. The work in doing that. Were there instances where you came close to having your cover blown? And I know, and we'll get to Hanssen, and I just kind of know some of that story. But before we get to that, non-Hanssen division, are there some instances where your cover came really close to getting blown?
Oh, certainly. Absolutely. And, me and my partner in a couple of instances, you have to be ready for everything. You have to be able to react in a moment and change your entire plan. Without getting into any real specifics, there are times when you're just out and exposed, and you have to quickly figure out how I'm going to hide in plain sight. I give you one example that I know I can talk about, because it's in Gray Day, and that the first people who ever read that manuscript were the FBI. We had followed a terrorist target to a restaurant. We knew that he was going to be at the restaurant. And we never had a picture of his wife. His wife was an American. So it was a really weird situation where we had this foreign national suspected of terrorism that was married to an American. And we were wondering whether we could potentially turn her, right? And they go to this restaurant in Old Town in Virginia. And I ended up being the guy on foot surveillance. And so they said, go find a place to set up outside the restaurant. It was a really difficult street. You couldn't really see it with a car. You couldn't park anywhere on the street. I wasn't dressed for that day. I think I'm wearing a long 3/4 length leather jacket. I looked like Donnie Brasco. I looked like an FBI guy. I was not, I thought I was just going to be sitting in the car all day, and I didn't really have a quick change of clothes. And so I'm standing out there, looking like an FBI person, sunglasses and everything. And suddenly a colleague drives up and hands me a camera with this massive telephoto lens and says, he's coming out. They want you to get pictures. I'm like, how the hell am I supposed to do this? I mean, if he comes out and sees me standing here, it's game over. I look like an FBI guy. I might as well be pointing a gun at him with this big camera, right? So you have to think fast on your feet. And I only had moments. I looked around and I realized that just sort of catacorner across the street, there was a small corporate building with tinted windows, like this dark tint windows, because it was sun facing.
Yeah.
And I ran in there and thinking I can shoot through the tint. I just got to open the f-stops up really hard. It's going to be a really hard shot, but I think I can get it. And of course, corporate buildings have what? Security. And now I got the security guy hassling me. I know this guy's coming out, and I had to say something. And I told him, you gotta be able to think fast. I told him I'm paparazzi, and I looked like paparazzi in that stupid leather jacket.
Because you can't say I'm FBI.
Yeah, no, you can never say that. And I said, I think I did that once. The only time I ever did that was I was desperate to go to the bathroom, and I just had like a second before my target moved, and I ran to a gas station, and I told the guy, I really need to use your restroom. Can I have the key? And he's like, oh, we don't give the key out anymore. And I was just, I thought I was going to burst. And I grabbed my FBI badge and I slammed it against the glass in front of him. I said, do you have a key now? And he was like, here's the key. It's the only time I ever used that get out of jail free card. But yeah, so I'm in this corporate building. I'm trying to figure out my camera through tint. This guy's giving me a hassle. He's saying he's going to call the police. And I said, hold on. If you wait a minute, Tyra Banks is in that restaurant and she's about to come out. You know, the supermodel?
Yeah.
And it had been all in the press. Like when a celebrity comes to DC, everybody pretends they don't care, but they really do. Right. So he's excited. And then he does what? He calls down like everybody from the building. And so now I'm surrounded by a bunch of people and I'm thinking, now I have great cover. The guy comes out with his wife and I start shooting through rolls of film. I'm dating myself, right? And I'm shooting a whole roll of film, loading, just trying to get that perfect picture because it's really hard to shoot through tint and then into a shadowed doorway. So now I'm dealing with all this different light and everybody's like, where's the person? What's going on? And I'm ignoring them and just concentrating on the camera. And they walk away. And I didn't really see, I'm not seeing the targets because I'm concentrating more on the film. Anyway, to make a long story short, the guy asked, well, what happened? And I was just like, well, she came out. You didn't see her? You got to watch fast to get their supermodels. And I left, got in the car, and later we developed the film. And what I couldn't see when I was taking the picture, because I was so focused on the photography, was that they were in a fight. He puts his hand up to her. She gets really angry. They're yelling back and forth. He storms off one way. She storms off the other way. And it was this one picture with this extreme anger on the part of our subject and this sort of fear on her face that actually won me an award in the tiny little circles in the FBI that no one would ever know about, because that was the picture that allowed our analysts to decide that we could approach her and there was something going on here. It could have been even abusive and we were going to see if we could turn her. We turned her and that broke the case.
Yeah. And just for those who aren't the uninitiated, when you say turn her, she becomes part of your investigation. She becomes an asset.
She was willing to help us. Yeah.
Okay. I want to get to Robert Hanssen. And, if I was going to kind of give the Reader's Digest version, but I'll let you give the Reader's Digest version.
Certainly.
This story is obviously, you were kind of at the center of this thing. So if you can talk about Robert Hanssen, who he was and how you kind of came into that entire case.
Yeah, absolutely. Robert Hanssen was the most damaging spy in FBI history and quite possibly the most damaging spy in U.S. history. He was a 25-year veteran of the FBI. So he was right when we learned about him that he was the potential spy we've been after for decades. He was about to retire. During his time in the FBI, he was an expert in counterintelligence analysis. He had also been an auditor. So he would fly to all of the FBI legal attaché offices all over the world and audit them and see how well they were doing in their counterintelligence goals and in information collection goals. He was a supervisory special agent. He was actually a decorated agent who was an expert at identifying potential spies. So this is a guy who was a trained spy hunter who had made a career of catching spies, of hunting them at least. And it turns out he was also the legendary spy that the entire intelligence community had been after, a guy who was only known by the code name Gray Suit. Everybody was looking for Gray Suit. I mean, every person, generations of FBI agents and ghosts and personnel, came up hoping to hunt Gray Suit, and no one could ever find him.
So he was a legend before he was caught.
He was a legend before he was caught, and no one knew who he was, whether it was even a he or a she,
right?
What agency this person was in. I mean, the FBI was absolutely sure that all the leaks were coming from the CIA, and but could have just as easily been the NSA or a military, or it doesn't matter. It didn't matter. The fact of the matter was, for decades, this spy, Gray Suit, had given some of the most damaging information that's ever been given to a foreign power to the Soviet Union and then Russia. That's how long he lasted. I mean, he began his espionage during the time of the Soviet Union, and then there was the collapse of the Soviet Union and the reformation into the Russian Federation, and Gray Suit continued. And we had no idea who this was. During that time, he gave up lives. So between 84 and 85, the United States lost every single one of our assets in Russia, in the Soviet Union. They were flown back to Moscow and either executed or pressed into hard labor. So we were completely blind. Our CIA was blind. All our assets were gone, all our spies. He gave up undercover operations. He gave up undercover operatives, and they lost their cover. And look, I relied on my cover to protect me. If you lose your cover, best case scenario is you're burned. You can't work again. Worst case scenario is you take a bullet to the back of your head.
Yeah.
And he gave up things like our entire nuclear warfare plan, what we would do if the Russians fired at us, if we decided to fire first, our continuity of government plan, and so much more. I mean, I could go on and on and on. He was a dastardly spy. Yeah. And we only learned about him in December of 2000. He's about to retire in April. So the FBI had to make this incredibly rapid case to trap him, to find a way to learn whether he was the spy we were after, and then find the information that would make a slam dunk case. In other words, what the FBI wanted was a smoking gun, the one thing that you just never find, right? Investigations tend to be little pieces that add up to the facts that allow you to get a good prosecution. But Hanssen was such a prolific spy and had done so much damage for so long, undermined the entire FBI for so long, that we were desperate to find that smoking gun that would make the case indisputable.
Yeah.
And so they built the better mousetrap. They gave him his dream job, and they created a brand new section in the FBI called the Information Assurance Section, located in headquarters. And they put him in charge of it, promoted him to executive service, asked him to delay his retirement, which almost never happens, because he was a computer expert and they needed him to build cybersecurity for the FBI. That's how they sold it to him. They said, we're going to give you staff. We're going to find you a guy who knows how to, turn computers on and help you. And then they looked around the FBI for a special agent who was trained to go undercover face to face with a target like this. And they couldn't find a single one who could do this and turn on a computer, because the FBI just was sort of behind the curve in computerization at that point. So they looked deeper, and I had, I've always been a bit of a hacker, I think hackers are good guys, right? I don't like the moniker hacker for bad guys.
Right.
The hackers for me are all the guys like me in the 80s who, played with security, never did anything wrong, and now work for cybersecurity companies or started our own. And Hanssen was also a hacker, but so was I. And I was so frustrated by having to handwrite surveillance logs that I developed an entire program in the FBI where I created a tactical analysis database. And so I could look at targets over time and do predictive analysis of where they'd be in the future, and it worked. And the whole point of putting this together was so that people would have to type their logs and then upload it directly into the system. And, there was a pilot program and it worked. And the problem with bucking any system in a bureaucracy like the government is you get notoriety. Nobody gives you an award, right?
No.
So it was like, oh, this guy, this Maverick O'Neill, screwing around and, doing all these things. But my supervisor was like, this guy can program and he knows how to hunt spies. He can sell this. And so they took a risk. They decided to throw someone untrained in the office with the biggest spy in U.S. history and hoped I came out and caught the guy. And I
So,
did.
um, so by the time Hansen is named the section chief of, you said the information assurance
Section. Yep.
section, um, I'm surprised I even remembered that. um, but when they put him in charge, he was on their radar. They had him in their sights, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
a former KGB intelligence officer. This is how far this goes back. When the KGB was disbanded in the collapse of the Soviet Union, and it was reformed into two agencies called the SVR and the FSB.
Mm-hmm.
The SVR are like the CIA spies for us, and the FSB is their internal police. It's more like the FBI, although they're brutal and they beat everybody up all the time. So
Right.
not quite the same. This guy stole secrets, like most of them did, and had a little bit of a retirement plan. Let's call it that. And
Okay.
what he did is he stole a file and worked, and then decided he wanted to retire and have a better life for him and his kids. And he sold it to the FBI for millions of dollars. The FBI bought it thinking it was going to point to a CIA case officer, but instead it pointed directly to Robert Hanssen, and hearts fell in that tiny little room of case agents who received the information, of special agents who received it. It was actually a joint CIA FBI task force. One, because the FBI had blamed the CIA for 22 years and they were wrong. And two, because the individual was Robert Hanssen. And at one point during this case, Hanssen, as the top Russian analyst, was brought in to hunt Graysuit. He was put in charge of catching himself. And, being in charge of the squad to catch himself meant that he could throw the FBI on wild goose chases for years.
So he was at one point leading the team tasked with finding him.
Yeah, he was asked to make a list of individuals within the government that could potentially be Graysuit. And he did. He sat down and he made, as an analyst, he made a very detailed list and sent these FBI agents all over the country and world in these wild goose chases that pointed anywhere but him.
So, when did you become, when did the gray suit Robert Hansen probe, I guess, become, part of your purview when you were pulled in?
Yeah, that December. It was one of the most rapid cases that ever came together. They had to do something to keep Hansen from retiring. They had to keep him in the FBI because in order to catch somebody and have that smoking gun, you need to catch them in the act of espionage.
Right.
So in order to give him space to do that, they had to keep him in the FBI and give him access to information.
Yeah.
And so they put him in charge of information assurance. You could see all the information, and he just started stealing it. And we were waiting for him to make that final drop.
So before we get to the final drop, the thing that's fascinating to me is that, we live in a world now, obviously, everything is digital now.
Yes.
And it's amazing to me that someone could do what he did in an analog world.
Yeah, but he was clever. He penetrated computer systems at the FBI that were never built to defend from a trusted insider. And the FBI had a little bit of institutional bias where they just didn't believe that the good guys would go rogue. They wouldn't admit it to themselves. They weren't doing the auditing and the analysis and the tracking of computer systems that they now do incredibly effectively. I mean, in grade A, I call Hansen the modern architect of the FBI, because by arresting him and getting him to plead guilty, and part of his sentence was that he had to cooperate with any agency who wanted to ask him questions, and he did for years and years and years. The FBI was able to learn all the things that he broke so they could fix it and make it stronger. It's kind of like any company that's hit by a massive ransomware attack,
right,
and they come out of the crucible, they're always stronger. They have robust cybersecurity, they have better policies and practices, they're much less likely to get hit by a ransomware attack again.
Yeah. So Hansen essentially exposed the vulnerabilities.
Every single vulnerability he could find. And he would steal data. He started with paper, sure, they all did, but then he was one of the first spies to ever steal data from computer systems, and then his drops were floppy disks. He would drop data on floppy disks instead of just like a ream of paper. It's a lot easier to save all of that information on a bunch of floppy disks and just take them in your pocket than have to, use a microfiche camera or pull out, or try to scan everything, because paper is actually was actually tracked in the FBI. If you try to take a document out of a building, that document's gone, and that document did get checked into whatever repository.
Yeah. So can you take me to when the drop, and when you guys finally put the bracelets on Hanssen, for lack of a better term, when his work is all when the team finally brings it in?
Yeah, certainly. Well, we needed to know when the drop was going to be. I felt very strongly that he's going to make a drop. His attitude's changed. His mentality has changed. He's very excited. Now I'm finally using my psychology degree, right?
Right.
And, but we were struggling, and, we didn't know when. And we were afraid we'd miss it. Even, the investigative specialists, the ghosts if you're being followed by a ghost, you're done. They're not going to fail. I mean, the best in the entire world at doing this, but mistakes happen. Hanssen was an expert in counter surveillance. Maybe he doesn't make the drop because he sees something that spooks him. So we didn't want to just rely on following Hanssen 24/7, which is exhausted, for him to bring like a team to that final drop. So the mandate for me was to find out when it was going to be. How the hell do you do that? I can't just ask them, right? I can't even do it with innuendo. I was learning a lot about how to have conversations that have, levels and levels within them.
Yeah.
But I wasn't that adept, and I'm not a magician. So what I did was I observed Hanssen, which is what my training was. And I realized that a dude had a Palm Pilot, and he loved it. He absolutely loved this device. And we talked about it ad nauseum. And I sat down with the case agent who was in charge of the special agent who was in charge of me. Just basically, her job was making sure I don't screw up. And her name was Kate, and she and I came up with this plan with another supervisory special agent who was in charge of ops. His name was Richard Garcia, both still great friends. And the three of us came up with this plan where we were going to completely social engineer Robert Hanssen to get him away from this Palm Pilot, which has a bunch of data on it, and it's a big calendar, and see whether that were some clues. And I just felt, I had this instinct that we were going to find something good on there. But he always had it on his person, and the only time he didn't have his person was when he put it in his bag right next to his desk. So how do you do that? Yeah. Well, we made him angry. We threw him off his game. And, we had the section chief, Richard, and an assistant director who was read into the case, who didn't even know this case was happening in headquarters right under his feet, come into the office unannounced, challenge him to go shooting in the sub-basement shooting range, rifle range, and told him that this wasn't a request, this was a demand, and you'll come with us right now. And so he's angry, and he grabs his firearm and ear protection, eye protection, and for the first time he forgets to grab that Palm Pilot.
And I should say, partially because I've heard some of your keynotes on this, all of this stuff that you're talking about, kind of these different moves, were the result of like knowing his psychological profile.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. Everything, I put together everything that I had learned about him. He hates authority, anyone above him in the chain of command. He really didn't like Rich Garcia at all. He was jealous of the fact that Garcia had a window office. He'd talk about that all the time. I knew he hated this assistant director, and so I suggested this be the guy that we read into the case. He was really opposed to being interrupted. He was a big narcissist.
Yeah.
So, he wanted to show that these guys he didn't like, he could outshoot them, and he really loved shooting. So it all fit, it all worked, and for the first time, we got him away from that device. And then I had to get it copied, and I ran down 3 flights of steps, and I handed it out to a tech team that we had just waiting on the 6th floor in this like unmarked room with just banks of computer equipment. We didn't know what I was going to get. I ended up grabbing a Palm Pilot, a data card, and a floppy disk. They were all in his bag, and I just grabbed it all and ran down. It all has data on it, right? And they start copying it. And as they're doing that, I get a text that says, he's out of pocket, he's coming to you. I had an asset down in the range, watching him. And, I've seen the CCTV footage. He gets down there, he sends a target down range, he fires off 1 clip, right? Boom, boom, boom. Yeah. And then he brings target back, he looks at it, and then he just holsters his firearm and he just abruptly leaves. He doesn't say a word. He just leaves. And he probably realized, I'd forgotten my Palm Pilot. It turns out that was a big mistake because I'm sitting there copying it. And, I managed to get it back just in the nick of time. I kneeled down in front of his bag. I realized I have no clue what pocket I pulled it out of. And this guy's the most meticulous person on earth. And it made me divine intervention, just massive amounts of luck. I put it all in there as he's coming through the door, run back to my desk, put the best poker face I've ever had right here. And he glares at me, goes into his office, slams his door, and I hear what? Zip, right? Zip. And I'm thinking, it's over. I'm done. I'm in a lot of trouble right now. But I sat there because I knew that this was my mistake to recover from. And if I wasn't there when he came out, he was in such a heightened state of anxiety over this whole situation. He might have never made that last drop. And, he could have cut and run and he'd be, I don't know, living in Moscow with Putin and Snowden right now.
Yeah.
So I sat there and he comes at me, leans over my desk and he says, "Were you in my office?" And look, I planned for everything. And I said, "Yeah, I was. I put a memo in your inbox. Didn't you see it?" And he holds that stare, this really brutal stare, and he says, "I never want you in my office again," and leaves. And within that week, he made that final drop. We not only knew where it was going to be, when, in Foxstone Park, just after 7 p.m. at night on the Sunday before President's Day in February, because the Palm Pilot is a digital calendar. And by copying the information and then understanding his encryption and decryption schemes, and how he would change dates with this sort of mathematical formula, we're able to figure out exactly where he'd be and when, and catch him in the act of making a drop at a known foreign intelligence drop site.
So the calendar, it didn't say 7 o'clock Wednesday drop at Foxstone Park, but so you guys had to unencrypt, if that's even the word I'm looking for.
We decrypted, yes. We decrypted the Palm, because it was all encrypted, and the FBI can break encryption. Takes a few days, but they can do it. And then we're able to figure out his math, because I had in a prior search of his office found a data card that had a letter to the Russians that explained the math he would use to change the dates, right? Mm-hmm. So they would come up with it. You would apply a factor to the date that they talked about, so you would get the real date of the drop. That way he could. Sure. Yep. He had like his own personal cipher.
Yeah. So were you there when he made the drop and when they arrested him?
I was not there. I had no reason to be there because I wasn't. I don't make arrests. Ghosts don't make arrests. We just disappear and fade into the background. We're law enforcement officers, but we are not. No mandate to actually make an arrest.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been there because the FBI didn't want him to know I had any part in this. Yeah. And in fact, they didn't tell him for a long time that I had any part in this. I wasn't allowed to talk about it. I went back to the street and went back to work, ghosting targets, just waiting to see if I got called to testify, because that would have been difficult. I would have had to testify to all the evidence we found during this case. And he ended up pleading guilty. It was we did find the smoking gun. It was a slam dunk case. He had no way of getting out of it. And
was the Palm Pilot the smoking gun?
It was the smoking gun.
Yeah.
It was absolute smoking gun for this case. Yep.
I know he died at Supermax in Florence, right? ADX Florence in Colorado, I believe.
Yep, ADX in Colorado in June.
Did you ever have a conversation with him after?
I didn't.
After he was arrested?
It's one of my big regrets that I never had a conversation with him. I tried multiple times. The easiest opportunity for me was when he was in Pennsylvania for a good year or two before he decided he didn't want to cooperate anymore, and so he was sent to Supermax.
Yeah.
And which I don't know whether it was better if he was put to death or sent to Supermax. I think Supermax is actually worse. But I requested the FBI that I be allowed to go visit him. I just wanted that closure to the case. I wanted to ask him a bunch of questions. I felt like I needed it for myself, for my own psychological well-being.
Yeah.
I since learned that I suffered some PTSD from certain things that happened. And I think that would have helped a lot, but the FBI denied it. Actually, what they said is we're still trying to get to a settlement. This is very early on, and to make sure he continues to plead guilty. And we're afraid that if he knows you did what you did, he will rattle the bars of his cage, lawyer up, and not work with us.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
I that was denied. And then later I tried to, when he was just rotting away in Supermax, I tried to visit, but you can't get in there.
Yeah.
I tried the Bureau of Prisons. I tried the FBI. They were all like, you have to ask the family. I didn't really want to do that. I'm like, somebody has to be able to just get to him and see if he'll give permission, because
Yeah.
he could have put me on the list. And then the FBI was like, well, that would be really difficult. An FBI agent would have to be in the room with you. I'm like, I don't care.
Right.
We'd have to know all your questions ahead of time. And yeah, so it just didn't happen.
One of the things that I've always found fascinating about counterintelligence and the spies who spy on the spies, right?
Right.
And is the concept of trust. Because inside the FBI, the CIA, people that do the work that you do, and as evidenced by what you did with Hanssen, at some point you're spying on the people that you are sharing offices and cubicles and hallways with.
That's absolutely true.
And to some extent, at the end of the day, the FBI becomes just, 15,000 individuals, everyone looking at each other. And I can't wrap my head around how people like you who do the work you did, how you view the concept of trust. I mean, even in your personal life, it's just got to be, talk to me a little bit about that. It's a fascinating element that I've never been able to wrap.
Yeah, I think trust is very important. I think that we have to trust those we love, and we have to trust those that we're incredibly close to, our closest friends. I talk about this in the rubric of I sometimes call cybersecurity counterintelligence, because I see it as the same thing. Don't trust blindly. Trust has to be earned. Maybe that's the way to think of it. My first instinct is don't trust, and then find a way that I can trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can I prove to myself that this is a person I can trust? And then you earn my trust, right? And if you lose it, you're never going to get it back again. Maybe that's part of what the lessons I learned in the FBI have instilled upon me. But look, if you're going to be working against, cyber spies or cyber criminals, and those are the spies I'm after today, the lessons I try to teach are don't trust, especially when you're online. Don't trust that the individual is who they say they are, that this email is stating what it says to state, that it's even coming from the person that says they're sending it. Always start by not trusting and seeing if you can find a way to trust. I call that email archaeology, right?
Yeah.
And even in my personal life, look, I've got my closest friends that I trust implicitly, obviously my wife and my family. But with new people, you use a grain of salt. In the FBI, it was difficult because even on a team, you're watching each other, because we were the last line of defense.
That's kind of what I'm thinking more about, internally. It's almost like an infinity mirror. You're putting two mirrors up to face each other.
Right.
You're tracking a potential agent, and who's to say that agent hasn't caught on and has someone else tracking you, and it turns into this never-ending back and forth.
I had a team leader once who, we're sitting down in the squad just talking, and he said something that stuck with me. And he said, in what we do as ghosts, we're given all the keys to the kingdom. We know all the cases. We know all the targets. We know all the foreign intelligence officers who are spies across all the different countries. If you're a special agent, you work on a squad and you're focused on one thing, right?
Yeah.
We're focused on everything, because we would bounce from case to case. I mean, you don't want to have a team of people, day in and day out working the same target, because then they start recognizing you, right? In the grocery store, in the mall, and everything. And he said that, with that level of access, it's no wonder that people become spies. They don't pay us enough, right? And we're the only ones watching ourselves. And I thought about that, because we were, because the worst thing that could possibly happen is a ghost goes rogue, becomes a spy, because you just have too much data.
Yeah.
So we're watching the targets, we're watching each other. You're always wondering, and it can lead to some bad blood sometimes within the team. It's hard because in covert operations and any kind of special operations, you need to rely implicitly on your team. But
Right.
there was always that little bit of hedging, you know?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing that's interesting to me, kind of what you're talking about is like, because you guys were sort of in an isolated group within the Bureau. And, again, this is based on a lot of things I've kind of read and seen in various corners, but like, I've often wondered how much loneliness plays a factor.
Oh yeah,
And
there's
because you're
definitely
so
that.
isolated, right? And
Yeah.
you are not necessarily like the rank and file with everybody. You're kind of like off in your own corner. And if you're in the field and you're like, trying to track a target and you're by yourself, there's got to be a feeling of isolation, no?
Yeah, there's that, but I put it another way. It's actually harder when you leave the FBI because you abruptly, most of those people that were your colleagues day in and day out that were really close to disappear because it becomes very awkward. You no longer can talk about all the things you just talked about. You're
Right.
on the outside. And at the same time, one day you had access to everything, this fire hose of information. What's really happening in the nation? What are the biggest threats? Where should I avoid this Sunday, right?
Yeah.
And then the next day you're cut off. And that is really difficult.
Yeah.
That's really difficult for a lot of people to adjust to.
Yeah. Because you're essentially completely in the dark after that happens.
Yeah, and then you have to figure out, well, what do I do next? I know a lot of military people have the same problem, and you come out, and then suddenly that family you were a part of is gone. You still go grab beers and do that, but all of the operational work, you can't talk about it. You can't be a part of it. You can't even touch the subject at all.
Yeah. Well, Eric, I want to give you, before we kind of get out of here, I don't want to keep you too long. I want to give you the opportunity to talk about your book and, make sure that you give our audience the understanding of what the book is, what it's called. So you go ahead and give us
Yeah, sure.
Give us that.
Well, I'm the author of Gray Day. It was a bestseller about the undercover investigation to catch Robert Hanssen, and I do a really cool trick in the book. It's a first-person narrative, so it reads like a spy thriller. Everyone who's read it says it's really exciting, but then I take a moment to step outside of that narrative,
Right.
and through those little moments, I'm teaching you everything you need to know about the evolution of espionage. The idea that it started with the cloak and dagger stuff, and through Hanssen, it is now all cyber espionage. So you're going to learn a lot about how espionage grew from the cloak and dagger, meets in old train stations and dead drops under park bridges and under the White Rock, and to today, where the most espionage is carried out, where the spy never even leaves Beijing or Moscow or Tehran, right? They're just attacking you directly. So it's a really thrilling book about how I caught a spy, but also how you need to think about what spies are doing today. And my next book, which comes out early 2025, is called The Invisible Threat. That's done. It's with HarperCollins. We're just getting ready for the publication date, which I don't have yet. And that book is all about cybercrime. So using a similar spy story about being part of a company that was suffering a massive ransomware attack to carry you through the narrative, right? Once again, first person. I also talk about everything you need to know about cybercrime. First part teaches you to think like a spy, and the second part teaches you the skills to be a spy hunter.
Got it. Okay. So you're saying that spying these days in 2024 is all ones and zeros?
Most of it is, yes. Most spies are now cyber spies.
Yeah.
You can do a lot less work. You can get a lot more information, and you don't even have to get on a plane.
Got it. Okay. Eric O'Neill, thank you so much for your time. We really, really do appreciate it.
Andrew, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.